The summers of my childhood were marked by endless days spent at my grandparents' house by the lake. It was a remote, secluded place, surrounded by thick woods and shrouded in mist most mornings. The lake itself was vast and still, its waters dark and mysterious, a mirror reflecting the sky and the trees in perfect eerie symmetry. I remember the way the air would hang heavy with moisture, the scent of wet leaves and earth filling my lungs. There was a quiet to the place, a stillness that was both calming and unsettling. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant call of a loon, and the soft lapping of the water against the shore. My grandparents' house was old and weathered, a creaky, sprawling structure with peeling paint and sagging porches. It had been in the family for generations, passed down from my great-grandparents to my grandparents, who spent their retirement years there, far from the bustle of the city. To me, it was a place of endless wonder and adventure, a sanctuary where I could lose myself in the woods, exploring and imagining all manner of fantastical things. But as I grew older, I began to notice the strange, unsettling atmosphere that seemed to pervade the place. There was something about the lake, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, a feeling that I was being watched from beneath the surface. My grandparents never spoke of it directly, but I could sense their unease, the way their eyes would dart nervously to the water whenever they thought no one was looking. My grandfather, a man of few words, often warned us not to swim too far from the shore, his voice gruff and serious. "There are things in that lake," he would say, his eyes dark and distant, "things that don't belong to this world." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. To me, the lake was just a lake, a place to splash and play and catch fish. But as the years passed, I began to notice things, strange, inexplicable things that made me question everything I had ever known about that place. There was the time my cousin Jacob went missing, for one. He was only 8 years old, a year younger than me, and we had been playing by the water's edge, skipping stones and chasing dragonflies. I remember turning around for just a moment, distracted by something in the woods, and when I looked back, he was gone. The adults searched for days, scouring the woods, dragging the lake, but they never found him. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the earth. And then there were the whispers. I would hear them at night, lying in bed with the window open to let in the cool breeze. Soft, indistinct voices carried on the wind from the direction of the lake. They were too faint to make out any words, but there was something in their tone, something that sent a chill down my spine. I would pull the covers up to my chin and squeeze my eyes shut, praying for sleep to take me before the whispers grew louder. But the most disturbing thing of all was the woman. I saw her for the first time when I was 14. It was late summer, the last few days before we would return home and I would start high school. I was sitting on the dock, my feet dangling in the water, watching the sun set over the lake. The sky was a riot of colors, deep oranges and purples, streaked with the last rays of the sun. The water was calm, undisturbed, a perfect reflection of the sky above. And then I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the lake, far from the shore, her figure pale and ghostly in the fading light. She was facing away from me, her long dark hair trailing in the water, her arms hanging limply at her sides. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to look away. She was too far out to be standing, yet there she was, her feet seemingly anchored to the lake bed beneath the dark water. I wanted to call out to ask who she was, what she was doing there, but my voice caught in my throat. I felt a deep, instinctual fear, a terror that I had never known before. Something was wrong, terribly, horribly wrong. And then slowly she turned to face me. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes dark and hollow. Her mouth was a thin, bloodless line, and as she stared at me, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the very air around me had grown thick and heavy, suffocating me. She raised one hand, pointing directly at me, and in that moment, I knew with every fiber of my being, that she wanted me to come to her, to join her in the depths of the lake. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and ran back to the house as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was inside. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty halls. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. I didn't want to believe it myself, didn't want to acknowledge the terror that had gripped me so completely. But I couldn't shake the image of her face, those hollow eyes staring into my soul, her outstretched hand beckoning me to join her in the depths. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft whispers that drifted in through the open window. They were louder now, more insistent, and I could almost make out words, though they were in a language I didn't understand. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, the soft, rhythmic splashing of water, as if someone were walking up the shore. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was coming closer, moving steadily up the path toward the house. I could hear it clearly now, the slosh of water-soaked footsteps, the rustle of wet fabric. I held my breath, my body trembling with fear, and then I heard it, a soft, wet knock at the door. The knock echoed through the house, low and deliberate, like someone gently rapping their knuckles against the wood. I froze, every muscle in my body tense, as the sound reverberated through the empty halls. My grandparents were asleep, their room on the other side of the house, too far to hear the knock. I was alone, the only one awake, the only one who knew. For a long moment, I sat there in bed, too terrified to move, too afraid to breathe. The soft splashing of water had stopped, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. My eyes were fixed on the door to my bedroom, half expecting it to swing open on its own, to reveal her. But the door remained closed. Another knock, this time louder, more insistent. It echoed down the hall, a hollow, empty sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I should go wake my grandparents, tell them that something or someone was outside, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The fear had paralyzed me, rooted me to the spot. The knocking continued, each one more forceful than the last, as if the visitor was growing impatient. I could feel the terror rising in my chest, a cold, suffocating dread that threatened to swallow me whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. Silence. For a moment, I didn't dare to hope, didn't dare to believe that it was over. I sat there listening, my heart pounding in my ears. But the house was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees outside. I let out a shaky breath, my body trembling with relief. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it had all been a bad dream, a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive mind. But then, from the other side of the door I heard it, a soft, whispering voice, just barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. The voice was faint, almost ethereal, but there was no mistaking the words. "Let me in." I bolted out of bed, my heart leaping into my throat. The voice was unmistakably hers, soft, haunting, the same voice I had heard whispering in the darkness all those nights. She was outside, waiting for me just beyond the door. "Let me in," the voice whispered again, more insistent this time, as if she could sense my hesitation. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I couldn't let her in. I knew deep down that if I opened that door, if I allowed her to cross the threshold, I would be lost. She would take me, drag me down into the dark, cold depths of the lake, and I would never be seen again. But the voice continued, a soft, relentless plea that gnawed at my resolve, chipped away at my fear. "Please, let me in." My hand was shaking as I reached for the door, my mind a whirl of confusion and terror. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn and run, but something held me there, something in her voice, something in the way she spoke my name. And then, just as my fingers brushed the cold metal of the doorknob, I heard another sound, a soft, steady humming, coming from the direction of my grandparents' room. The tune was familiar, comforting, a lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me when I was a child. The sound seemed to cut through the fog of fear that had clouded my mind, grounding me, pulling me back from the brink. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and with it came a warmth, a sense of safety and love that I hadn't felt in years. I could almost see my grandmother's face, smiling down at me, her eyes full of warmth and kindness. The door to my grandparents' room creaked open, and my grandfather stepped out, his face stern, his eyes hard as steel. He didn't say a word, just looked at me, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I tore my hand away from the doorknob, stumbling back, and the voice outside let out a soft, mournful wail, like the cry of a wounded animal. The sound sent a shiver of terror down my spine, but I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I turned and ran down the hall toward my grandparents' room, my heart pounding in my chest. My grandfather stepped aside, allowing me to pass, and as I entered the room, I caught a glimpse of his face, calm, resolute, as if he had known this moment would come. He followed me inside, closing the door behind us with a soft click, and the moment the door shut, the voice outside fell silent. The house was plunged into an eerie stillness, the only sound the soft humming of my grandmother, who was still asleep, her lips moving faintly with the tune. My grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "She can't get you in here," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now." I wanted to ask him who she was, what she wanted, but the words caught in my throat. I could still hear the whispers in my mind, still feel the pull of her voice, the icy dread that had gripped me so completely. But my grandfather's presence was a balm, a steady anchor that kept me grounded, kept me safe. He guided me to a chair beside the bed where I sat down, my legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. "She's been after you for a long time," he said quietly, his eyes distant, as if he were recalling a memory from long ago. "Ever since that day by the lake, she's been waiting for her chance." I shivered, the memory of that day coming back to me in a rush. The woman in the lake, her pale face, her hollow eyes, the way she had beckoned to me, calling me to join her in the water. "Who is she?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. My grandfather sighed, his expression grim. "She was a woman who drowned in that lake a long time ago. No one knows exactly how or why, but her spirit never found peace. She haunts the lake, luring people to their deaths, trying to drag them down to join her." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a sorrow I had never seen before. "She's been after you since you were a child. I've tried to protect you, but she's strong and she's patient. She almost had you tonight." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a stone. The fear that had gripped me earlier was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but it was tempered now by a new understanding, a sense of the danger that had been stalking me for years. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. My grandfather's face hardened, a steely resolve in his eyes. "We leave," he said simply. "We leave this place and never come back." And that's exactly what we did. The next morning, we packed our bags in silence, the weight of the previous night's events hanging heavily over us. My grandmother, still half asleep, was confused by our sudden departure, but my grandfather didn't offer any explanations. He simply loaded the car and drove away, leaving the lake and the woman behind. As we drove, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, the misty lake fading into the distance. A part of me felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the place that had once been my sanctuary, my refuge. But that sadness was overshadowed by a deep, profound relief, a relief that I had escaped, that I was still alive. We never spoke of that night again, not to each other, not to anyone. My grandparents sold the house soon after, and we never returned to the lake. I went on with my life, went to school, grew up, and tried to put it all behind me. But the memory of that night stayed with me, lurking in the shadows of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that had almost claimed me. Years passed, and I thought I had finally left it all behind. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I would wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears. "Let me in." I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the sound of wet footsteps in the hall, the soft knock at the door. But it never came. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, waiting, biding her time. The lake may be far behind me, but I knew deep down that she would never stop searching, never stop trying to claim me. So I lived my life with the knowledge that one day she might find me again. One day I might hear her voice once more, beckoning me to the lake, calling me to join her in the cold, dark depths. But until that day comes, I will do everything in my power to stay away from the water, to keep my distance from the places where she might be lurking, waiting. And if that day ever comes, if she ever finds me again, I only hope I will be strong enough to resist her call, because if I'm not, I know there will be no escape. The lake will claim me, just as it claimed her, and I will be lost to the depths forever. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing.